So what I'm doing is I had made a split thread tutorial on Instagram, but I was so hyper aware of the 15-minute time limit that I had to rush through it to get through everything that I wanted. And that's not to say that I've got 45 minutes of stuff to get into, but like I said, it was just, I was hyper aware, and ended up leaving out a lot or not adequately kind of touching on some things that I feel are important. You might just want to know how to do it and move on, but if you just want to know how to do something, you are watching the wrong video, my friend. This is the channel you go to kill 30 minutes. So I'm going to subtly check my watch so I can keep track of my time myself. Okay, so I've got just what is going to be a plain Jane hotspot hare's ear. And I left this gaudy section behind the bead just to remind me to touch on an aspect of the process. But before I get there, just to kind of race through some of the benefits of split thread is, I'll backtrack real quick. When I first started tying, which wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things, compared to people who've been tying for decades, but when I started tying, there wasn't a ton of information on split thread. There was some info, but it was all the same info. You uncord your thread and you just jab your bodkin until you luck into center, and that's obviously not the preferred process, but that's how I heard it, because be it my over caffeinated hands shaking or my less than ideal eyesight, I just always had trouble doing it that way. And I just kind of created my own technique to achieving the same thing. And once it became not easy for me, once it became doable, it wasn't like this difficult task. Once it became familiar with me, I just ran with it, and it's to the point now when we're talking about nymphs, there isn't a situation where I'll wrap a hackle in the traditional manner. And I took it from CDC to, there was a period where I was only doing Partridge because I was determined to figure out how to successfully implement the split thread with other types of hackle. And there are some differences, which I won't go into here because I think just CDC in general is being one of the most, if not the most versatile material. There's enough to talk about without getting into the nuances of other feathers and other hackles. So I'm gonna keep this all about CDC, but I will be doing another redo of my Partridge and hen split thread video as well, or at least that's the hope. So while I start talking, while I continue to start talking, I'm going to go ahead and also start my thread. But with CDC, since there's so many uses, and all sorts of these uses require different aspects of the feather, you're regularly left with scraps. And while some of these scraps are easily reusable, there might be other scraps that you just don't have a need for, or don't feel you have a need for. Outside of just trimming it for dubbing, it might be more effort than it's worth, or at least seem that way, to use it in other flies, in other areas. I mean, for example, like one of the most common things is obviously dry fly wings. This is going to be a pretty dramatic example, but, take a feather like this. You're not going to palmer this. The stem is so thick that even if it was flexible, the bulk would just be unsightly. So, but you can still get some dry fly use out of this. But you use it as a wing, and then now you're left with this. And you could certainly use this for something like an F fly, where you actually want some stem in the wing for rigidity, it's designed into the fly. But maybe you either don't have a need for that fly or whatever. So now you're left with this that you can, again, you can of course peel it back for dubbing, but not many people do that. And so getting proficient at this method of soft hackles opens the door to all of this waste that would typically end up in the trash or on your carpet. Okay, on my carpet, in y'all's trash. Now you can set it aside and use it for collars, and not only does that make a use of this material, but it also frees up some of your better feathers that you would palmer with for more wings. There's too many good reasons to learn how to apply CDC in this manner that it seems to me a no-brainer, which is good, because often I feel like I have no brain. So this just works. So I guess I'll get into it. I recorded this earlier, and I did press record, but when I walked around, I saw that there was that wonderful "you have ran out of storage" pop up. So, yeah. But I spent like an hour earlier sorting through everything, like deleting all my family memories and all that useless stuff to make room for another take of a video I've already recorded, because that's what's important to me. So I left this void back to the fly because I wanted to emphasize the importance of making sure you have your dubbing running all the way up to the bead. And that means that even if you had your dubbing up to the bead, then you go to rib the fly, oftentimes when you go to tie something off, this is very dramatic, but you build up this thread band that pushes material back. If that is the case, you want to be prepared to add just another bit of dubbing to once again fill in that gap, because even if you were pommering, you want that material to sit down sandwiched between the bead and the dubbing. Or if you're tying a threadhead fly, a weightless fly, you want that material sitting there to prop up your wing. Because if you've got nothing there propping it up, and then you go and tie your thread over to lock it all in, now your soft hackle is just flowing straight back, and that hardly serves its purpose when it gets down in the agua. I mean, it just, yeah. So, trying to segue out of my moment of brain deadness, you want to make sure you have that void between the bead and dubbing as minimal as possible, so that you've got that shoulder of dubbing propping up the CDC fibers, or Partridge, or hen, etc. And that also is going to protect your thread, which will be under high tension, because that's what's holding the fibers in. When you cord your thread up, it becomes fairly fragile because of the amount of tension you're putting on it. And so you want to make sure those thread wraps are not exposed. I had a friend who's passed away now. We were talking about this versus pommering, and he says, I don't do that because it weakens the thread. And my thought process behind this, and what's turned out to be very much true, is as long as that thread is hidden but behind or between materials, it becomes inaccessible. And once it's inaccessible, it's a non-issue. You can be tying with 8-aught or 32-aught. I mean 18-aught or 32-aught. And as long as your thread is not exposed, the teeth isn't going to contact it. Therefore, the strength of the thread becomes a non-issue. So, I don't think there was anything else. I mean, there was, but that's the kind of stuff that really draws this video out unnecessarily. So, I'll just get to the meat and potatoes of it. So I've got, tool-wise, I have this super basic, super boring bulldog clip. Mine is slightly less basic and slightly less boring because it has a magnet on it. And magnets are kind of cool, so it makes the clip overall kind of cool. But really, it's just like marginally cool. You know, when compared to those $50 designer clips that Fly Company or Fly Store X is promoting, yeah, it's not very cool. But I have applied thousands and thousands of soft hackles with only this clip, this exact one, and I have zero desire to upgrade. And I'm not afraid to spend some money when it is of use. My hand is resting on a vise that is not cheap, but it's worth it to me. The action of this vise is substantially better than the cheaper vices I've used. This clip, while I have never used the, in my opinion, overpriced tools, I can guarantee you, or almost guarantee you, that it does as good of a job. Or slightly better, because it's got a magnet. And I just basically, I don't want to come off as like bashing these higher end tools, because I get it. I've got pocket knives that I've spent way too much money on, like an embarrassing amount of money that I'd rather not even say. So I understand spending more than you need to on a tool or an item because it tickles your fancy. What I want to get across is just because I'm just really making sure I don't vaguely call anybody out, because I don't want to do that right now. Just because so-and-so is raving over the flavor of the month tool does not mean you need that tool. You can get by with a $2.99 pack of 3 bulldog clips with magnets just fine. Just to explain how serious I am about this, if I haven't come across as serious, I literally just bought this like less than a week ago. I was in Walmart and walking through the stationery department, and I saw these on the wall, and I was just like, those are so cool. It was like $4 for a pack of 2, but it's basically a bulldog clip that's maybe a 1/2 inch wider, but it's like the perfect width to do zonkers with, to do dubbing loops with zonker hair, whereas my standard bulldog clip is a little short. So this, all I'm really bringing this up is to show you that, like, I am so excited to put this to use because it is functional and at a price that is just a non-issue. No flare, all function, and it's got a magnet. So does that make it cooler than the expensive stuff? Possibly, maybe not. Who's to say, really? Those guys from that flesh up. So I'm going to get into the CDC. I know you thought I never would. No wonder it takes me forever to get one of these filmed. So on the clipped side, I went ahead and trimmed the CDC fairly flush. I'm not worried about getting it exact because I don't want it exact. I want there to be some variance in it so that it has that natural appearance. But I obviously don't want fibers that are twice as long as needed. Yeah, that's just ugly and sloppy. And your boy ain't sloppy. I'm pretty sloppy at times. So now that I've got it clamped, I'm just going to run the scissors up along the stem. And you don't have to cut near the stem. Say you need a short collar, you might want to clip just the bottom third of these fibers, and then you might just want to trim, well, the heater's blowing this around, but you might want to adjust where you trim. You can make these calls as you see fit, but for this size 14 fly, I'm going to need pretty much the whole length of the fiber, or feather fibers, feather hackles, something like that. Vocabulary. Who needs it? Who needs it when you got emojis? So, I don't know why I do that, go into these weird things, because it always takes me off course, and it's never easy to segue back. So, I guess I should talk about splitting my thread instead of doing it while I'm joking. To split my thread, you do everything just like you do with the bobbin method, or bodkin. You're not jabbing your thread with another bobbin. You let your thread uncord. So my thread's been hanging free for a while, so it is naturally uncorded. But if I was actively using it, it was corded up, I would uncord it by spinning it counterclockwise. If I'm looking down from the hook at the thread, I want the spool going counterclockwise. And obviously you can overspin it and start cording it that direction, so you want to keep an eye on it. What I'll do, I've already overspun it, but I'll just keep running my scissors down it as it's spinning. And you will see, once it starts to get uncorded, you will see it get flatter and flatter. And once it flattens out almost completely, that's when you can stop your thread and start working on truly flattening your thread out. Just making a few more runs across it, and at this point, hopefully that's picking it up. It is super flat. I mean, it's one layer of fibers across my scissors. It's not bound up whatsoever. So now I'm going to take my scissors, because I had to create this method where I wasn't just jabbing away with a needle. Basically, I'm doing this partly by feel and partly by my eyeballs. I am laying my scissors? I am placing my scissors on the thread parallel, or perpendicular, but on the same plane. And then I want to lift the handle up to the point where the scissors are at a very shallow angle. And I'm doing that because as I run my scissors across the thread with slight pressure, so I'm creating that V in the thread, it's at that angle to where the tip of the scissors are going to start catching thread fibers as they pass. But it's not so steep that it's catching and shredding thread fibers. You just want it at an angle, enough of an angle to catch thread, but immediately release it. So I'm going to take my scissors, put it on like an equal plane. I feel like I'm describing that right. You know, vocabulary. Who needs it? But since I don't have an emoji to describe this, I'm going to try to describe it with vocabulary, despite the fact that who needs it? So I've got the scissors. I am tilting the handle up to allow that tip to start catching fibers. I've never done it in this orientation, so this is going to be an interesting... It sort of did at that time. This is weird. It's like I'm doing it looking in a mirror, so like my directions and motor function are backwards. So I'm just going to do it like I normally would and hope you can see it. So put pressure on the thread, and you'll see it almost open up. I mean, it is flat, and it's not going to take much to start splitting it. Once you've eyeballed enough fibers that have passed, that's when you just stop your scissors and you slide the tip through, and therefore prying the gap open. Then you just lock it with your fingertip and apply your CDC, releasing the gap once the butt ends of the CDC are well into the loop. And now you can make any adjustments. Say you don't want the butt ends, you just slowly and carefully pull the CDC out until the butt ends are fairly flush with the thread. I usually just keep them in. If it's a super small fly and the butt ends are long enough, I will make those adjustments, because it will become quite apparent when I tie it that you've got these. You just end up with a hard line around in the soft hackle, and it's pretty ugly. But on these bigger patterns, bigger flies, it comes out just fine. So to spin it up, I am spinning obviously the opposite direction that I spun it to uncord it. So I am cording the thread back up. And this is the part that just takes some practice. Cording it up to the point where the CDC becomes secure. I gotta test it. Yeah, it's pretty much there. Getting it to where it breaks when you pull on it and doesn't slide, like, that's when it's locked in. Obviously, it's not. It's too tightly bound to just pull out. But getting the thread to that point means you're working with fairly fragile thread right now. So it takes some practice to get used to it, because you've got to dial back on your tension. But once you get familiar with it, it's a non-issue. And I'll break thread occasionally, but it happens, and it still beats pommering a hackle, so I deal with it. And I also tie a lot of flies, so I can accept, a few broken pieces of thread as a appropriate waste. So now you don't have to add that dubbing. I've gotten to where I add it now instead of after I've wrapped the hackle, just because I want to add the dubbing before the threads come uncorded, and I can do that after, as long as I'm keeping the thread from spinning. But right now I know the thread is corded up, so I've got it where I just do it like this because I like it. So here I am. I'm about to wrap the collar. I can, and probably most often do, just throw the collar on, pull it back, and pretty it up with the dubbing, and it will look just fine like that. I can do that because I know I've got a dense enough collar. Another thing I'll do when it's sparser, when I've got to be more conscious of where those CDC fibers lie, just to make sure I've got proper distribution, I will take the time to stroke the fibers back and more methodically wrap the hackle. And then the last thing that I'll do is, this is a pretty good feather, came from a pretty good feather for hackle, so the fibers were fairly unique from one fiber to the next. Like the way they're not super straight, like super even in length. There's enough variance to where I don't have to do anything to make it look natural. But if I was working with maybe a thicker portion of CDC, where it is straighter and slightly stiffer, and I go to wrap it and it just looks very robotic, very artificial, before I wrap the collar, I can just run my hand over it, fingers over it, and rough it up. And that'll just put in all these little micro curves into the fibers. And so once you wrap it up, it just throws some uniqueness into the fibers. And if they're lacking uniqueness, it can really make a difference on the finished product. So as I said, I've got the dubbing on. You don't have to put it on when I did. You could go ahead and add a small noodle now. But again, you want to keep the thread from uncording, because it's going to want to spin in the direction that will take out that tension. And right now, you're too close to those fibers. You want the immediate thread in front of those fibers to stay corded. And the best way to do that is to just lock it in with a couple wraps of dubbing. But once you make those dubbing wraps, once you put that little micro collar in, then you let your thread uncord. If you try to do a whip finish with the thread while it's under that kind of tension, you're gonna break it. It's almost guaranteed, if you're gonna do a secure whip finish anyways. So you want it to uncord, and once it's uncorded, you can proceed to finishing the fly. And put your typical pressure on the thread. So that is in between a detailed description and a rushed description of at least my method of split thread, CDC collars, and some of my reasonings behind it. I could go into a lot more detail, but any more detail is just like basically hearing myself talk, and I don't know. I want to balance it to where like I talk enough to irritate you, but not enough to push you away. I want to draw attention, but keep you annoyed. Yeah, that's my ultimate goal in life. Okay, that's silly. I'm going to end on that silliness, because it's only going to get sillier. And that silly is going to turn into stupid. And that stupid's going to turn into regret.